Now, if you flip that around, you have to understand that really a great barrier to our godliness and a great barrier to our satisfaction with life is discontentment. You know, our society banks on this. They bank on the idea that we will become discontented and we will want more. Now, we know that discontentment in our society causes a lot of things. It causes unnecessary, irresponsible, harmful actions, especially unnecessary, irresponsible, and harmful spending. How many of you have ever bought a big ticket item and regretted it just 2 days later? Or maybe you wasted money on something that you realized that you were going to need that money for something else. And usually that's fueled by this sense of discontentment that we get. And so if I wanted to translate this verse, I'd translate it this way. Contentment is more valuable than anything that we can acquire fueled by our discontentment. That whatever we acquire fueled by this feeling of discontentment, the contentment that we have, it is much more valuable to us. And he goes on in verse 9, in 1 Timothy 6:9, he says this. He says, but those who want to get rich, once again, they're discontented. They want to get rich. They fall into temptation and a snare and many foolish and harmful desires, which plunge men into ruin and destruction. He says this discontentment will create this temptation within us, and we're going to do things that later on we're going to regret. And we're going to focus on things that are going to cause us to regret. And then in verse 10, we find he says this, for the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil. Now, is money evil? No. But the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil. Well, what happens when you start loving money? Well, and some, by longing for it, have wandered away from the faith. They didn't feel at home, didn't feel like family, weren't part of the kingdom, and pierced themselves with many griefs. When refusing the gain of contentment and pursuing the gain of discontentment, we run an enormous risk. And when we go back and we look at verse 6 and in verse 9 and in verse 10, when refusing the gain of contentment and pursuing this gain, we risk these things. And I want to put them up on the board for you to see. When fueled by discontentment, we run the risk of falling into temptation. We run the risk of being trapped. We run the risk of being controlled by harmful and habit-forming desires. We run the risk of plunging headfirst into ruin, plunging headfirst into destruction, wandering from the faith, and last, piercing ourselves with grief. Anybody want to do any of that? I'm not interested in that list. I mean, I don't want that to be part of my existence. I hope you don't either. But what he's saying is if your life is fueled by discontentment, this is what will await you. All of these things are part of Satan's trick to paint our world gray and make us feel like we don't have enough and maybe we're not enough. So as we move on, contentment, we need to check. Are we contented with the things that we have? Because if we can learn to be content and choose to be content with the things that we have, saying no to ourselves becomes a lot easier. And then the second spiritual discipline checkpoint is awareness. I don't know how many of you have seen the commercial I'm about to show. It's a commercial for a brand new Cadillac. It's out by General Motors. And this commercial is incredibly interesting. And it really stirs discontentment within us. I want to show that commercial to you right quick.
Why do we work so hard? For what? For this? For stuff? Other countries, they work, they stroll home, they stop by the cafe, they take August off. Off. Why aren't you like that? Why aren't we like that? Because we're crazy, driven, hard-working believers, that's why. Those other countries think we're nuts. Whatever. Were the Wright brothers insane? Bill Gates, Les Paul, Ali. Were we nuts when we pointed to the moon? That's right. We went up there, and you know what we got? Bored. So we left. Got a car up there, left the keys in it. Do you know why? Because we're the only ones going back up there, that's why. But I digress. It's pretty simple. You work hard, you create your own luck, and you gotta believe anything is possible. As for all the stuff, That's the upside of only taking 2 weeks off in August. N'est-ce pas?
As he stands in front of that beautiful swimming pool, man, don't you want one of those? I'd like a pool if I didn't have to clean it. And then he goes to this house, this immaculate house with children sitting there doing whatever the children were doing. And he passes this lovely woman who's his wife, and he's talking about all the achievement. And he's talking to people, and he's saying, you don't have this. You don't have this. And he gets to the end, and he makes this statement. He says, why do we work so hard? It's pretty simple. You work hard, you create your own luck, and you got to believe anything is possible. And for all the stuff, that's the upside of only taking 2 weeks off in August. Does anybody see a key component missing in that commercial? There's one key thing that when I go to make a major purchase, it is the driving force for that purchase. Does anybody know what's missing? The price of the car. It's missing. Now, this morning I showed this to our AV team, and I asked them to guess how much a Cadillac ELR costs. Okay? And they both guessed $65,000. My first house cost $52,000. But they were both wrong. The stripped down model of that automobile cost $75,000. Now, I don't know what a stripped down Cadillac is. Maybe that's missing one lug nut off every tire. I don't know. But the fully equipped one was $96,000. Now, here's what they're telling you. They're creating this dissatisfaction within you. And they're saying the average person makes $50,000 a year. If you will give us 2 years of your income, you'll be happy. And we watch that and we're just so unaware of what's happening. We're unaware that this discontentment is getting built within us. And we need to be aware of what's going on around us. And when we start looking at our wealth and people that want our wealth, we need to say, well, that's great, but what else could I do with that wealth? I want us to read this scripture together, 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18, because what happens is that sometimes we fool ourselves. We deceive ourselves and lie to ourselves. It says this, let no man deceive himself. If any man among you thinks that he is wise in this age, he must become foolish so that he may become wise. We have this ability to see these forces and create this discontentment and actually lie to ourselves. The problem is that once we become aware of the biggest lie in our culture, and that is wealth equals happiness, we have to respond to that. We don't have any choice. Now we go back to the book of 1 Timothy, and we look at verses 11 and 12. He says, when you find these lies, this lie of contentment through finance, flee from these things, you man of God, and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, perseverance, and gentleness. Fight the good fight of faith. Take hold of eternal life, which you were called, and you made the good confession in presence of many witnesses. He's saying, when we recognize the lie that is around us, the lie of discontentment, we have to respond to it. Not only do we have to respond to it, he uses some pretty strong words. He says, flee, pursue goodness, and to fight. And what he's saying here is he's saying, when you see and you become aware of the lie of discontentment, your response has to be intentional and it has to be aggressive. If we're going to be spiritually disciplined people and we become aware of things that stand in that way, we have to deal with them, and we have to deal with them right now. Because if we don't, we can fall into a very huge trap. There was a survey done and they were asking married couples who'd been married longer than 25 years. And they were asking them, when were you the happiest? And most of those people answered this way: when we were first married and we had almost nothing. Now I can tell you, when my wife and I got married, we were still students at Tennessee Tech. And we lived in a place they called Tech Village. They were slumlords, guys. Our windows in our apartment would get ice on the inside. We would wake up in the middle of the night with cockroaches scurrying. And I don't know that I've ever been happier. We didn't have anything, but that was okay. And the reason that people are happiest when they have less is because they have developed within themselves by force this ability to say no to themselves, this ability to be disciplined amongst themselves. And so I want to encourage you to think about those things. And we go back to 1 Timothy chapter 6, and we go backwards in verse 7 and 8, and Paul writes to Timothy, says, "For we've brought nothing into the world, and we can't take anything out of it either. If we have food and covering, with these we shall be content." And you know, I'm not going to stand here and tell you, you know what, all you need is food and clothes, and give the rest of it. If I said that, I would be a total hypocrite. We should enjoy life. It's okay to enjoy life, but you can't rob God in order to do it. And that's what the message is to Timothy, and that's what the message is to us as well. I'm going to end by saying this. You know, you remember that opening video with the woman with the nail in her head? Have you ever had a nail, maybe not in your head, in your foot? Did it hurt going in? You can nod your head in church, it's okay. We're progressive. Did it hurt coming out? Did it hurt after that? It did. There's some of you after last week decided that you know what, I need to be faithful in my giving. It was that nail in your head. It was the thing that you were holding back from God that you really needed to be faithful about. And so you decided this week that you're going to be faithful in that part of your life. You're going to be invested. You're going to practice this spiritual discipline. And I just want to let you know, because I'd be lying if I didn't say this. If you're just starting out with this spiritual discipline, it's going to hurt. You'll miss the money this week. There'll probably be something you're not going to be able to do that you'd like to do this week. It's going to hurt. And for the next several weeks, as you adjust to life of being more faithful, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt. And that nagging discontentment that comes from our society, it's going to attack you. It really is. But I want you to understand that being in a relationship with God and being a part of God's family and being a part of something bigger than yourselves is worth it. That knowing God and honoring Him in your life is worth it. It may be painful, but it's worth it. And so as we have these appetites and we're nagged by discontentment, I just want to encourage you and tell you, be faithful to God. Don't turn away from a course that creates discipline in your life, because it's worth it. Our God really is an awesome God. We worship the only God who was willing to die for the people that He would save. He's the only God that's called living. And His desire for our lives is very simple. He wants us to live for Him. And after this world's over, He wants us to live with Him. So I want to encourage you to do that. Some people may be making a choice about other areas of your life when it comes to your spiritual disciplines. Some people may be considering, I want to start that journey. I want to begin that relationship. We believe that happens through baptism. We want to encourage you to do that. If you desire the prayers of the church, especially about the spiritual disciplines that come with life, prayer, giving, fasting, meditate, any of those things. We're going to talk about spiritual disciplines this fall. But if there's something going on in your life and you need the prayers of the church, we want to pray with you. Our elders will meet with you. They'll be in rooms A5 and 7 across the hall if you'd like to talk with them. Whatever your needs are, We just want to be an encouragement to you this morning because we know sometimes being a follower of Jesus can be painful. And we love you. And we want to hold you up. So whatever we can do to serve you, we want to encourage you to come while we stand, while we sing.
My heart will sing, no other name.